Ramatís Timani Thachangid Verthan. This is episode 2 of a 10-part series exploring what Spiritism already knew about the civilizations out there, long before any file was declassified. On July 26, 2023, a former United States intelligence officer named David Grusch testified under oath before the House Oversight Subcommittee of the United States Congress. His credentials were not in question. He had held some of the highest security clearances the American government issues. He had served in the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He had been part of the Pentagon's task force on unidentified aerial phenomena. He sat in front of cameras. He raised his right hand. He swore to tell the truth. And then he stated calmly that the United States government has been operating a covert program of crash retrievals involving craft of non-human origin. That biological remains of beings not from this planet are in the possession of the federal government. And that this program has been kept hidden from the American public and from Congress itself for decades. The room went silent. The country went silent. Most of the world did not know how to process what had just been said. But somewhere on a quiet shelf in libraries across Brazil, and in homes where Spiritist books have been read for over a century, two authors were already speaking. Because what David Grusch testified to in 2023 was described, in remarkable detail, decades earlier, by a French educator in 1868, and by a Brazilian medium in the 20th century. This is the story of what they knew. What the government just adayef. To understand the weight of the Spiritist material, you have to first understand how recent the institutional shift has been. For 70 years, the official position of the United States government was unambiguous. There were no unidentified craft. There was no non-human presence. The witnesses were mistaken. The radar returns were anomalies. Anyone who suggested otherwise was considered, at best, naive. At worst, mentally unstable. That position held through every administration from Harry Truman to Barack Obama. Then, in December of 2017, the New York Times published a story that quietly cracked the wall. A Pentagon program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program had existed for years, funded with millions of taxpayer dollars, studying objects in our skies that no known nation could have built. The story was confirmed. The Pentagon did not deny it. The wall began to fall. In June of 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released its preliminary assessment on unidentified aerial phenomena. 144 military encounters. 80 of them captured by multiple sensors: radar, infrared, visual, weapon systems. The report concluded that these objects were real, physical, and technological in nature, and that nothing in the United States inventory, or in any known foreign inventory, could explain them. In 2022, the Pentagon created a new office called AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Its purpose, in plain language, was to investigate non-human technology. Officially, with a budget. Reporting to Congress. And then in 2023 came Grusch. Under oath. Cameras rolling. He testified that the United States had recovered materials and biological remains that, in his words, were not of this earth. He did not claim direct personal contact with the materials. He testified to what other officials had told him. His allegations have not been disproven. NASA convened its own independent study panel that same year. It recommended, in writing, that the phenomenon be treated as a matter of serious institutional science. This is the moment in which the world now lives. A moment where the question is no longer whether something is out there. The question is what they are. And what they want. What Kardec wrote 1868. Allan Kardec did not live to see any of this. He died in 1869, but the year before, he published a book that quietly assembled one of the most detailed early frameworks for understanding non-human intelligence in modern intellectual history. The book was called Genesis. Chapter 6, titled General Uranography, was Kardec's attempt to lay out the actual structure of the inhabited universe as described to him through the comparative testimony of mediums across multiple cities. What he documented was not vague. He did not claim that there might be life elsewhere. He claimed, categorically, that the universe is populated by intelligent beings at every conceivable stage of development, and that these beings fall into recognizable categories. Some are far less developed than humans. Their worlds are primitive, their intelligence rudimentary, their consciousness only beginning to recognize itself. Some are roughly at the human stage, mixed, conflicted, struggling with the same moral and material problems that define life on Earth. Some are significantly more advanced. On their worlds, suffering is rare. Cooperation has long replaced competition. Their understanding of physical reality exceeds ours in ways we are not yet equipped to imagine. And some, according to Kardec, have evolved so far beyond physical existence as we understand it, the very concept of a body no longer applies to them. Their existence is luminous. Their movement across what we call space does not require what we call technology. Read that last sentence again, because it answers a question the United States Department of Defense has been quietly asking since the 1940s. How do these objects move the way they do? How do they accelerate in ways that should kill any biological pilot? How do they shift directions without inertia? How do they appear and disappear on calibrated military radar? Kardec, in 1868, was being told the answer. The most advanced inhabitants of the universe do not require the kind of dense, mechanical craft we would need to build in order to cross those distances. Their movement operates on principles our physics has not yet discovered. This was published 60 years before the term flying saucer even existed. What Chico Xavier receive? In 1910, in a small town in the Brazilian state of Minas Gerais, a child was born who would go on to publish more than 400 books. His name was Francisco Cândido Xavier. He claimed across his entire life that he was not the author of any of those books. He claimed to be a medium, a person through whom discarnate intelligences communicated their work. He gave away all royalties. He lived in absolute poverty by choice until his death in 2002. He was investigated. He was tested. He was studied by skeptics, by journalists, by academics. Nothing was ever found that contradicted his claim of mediumship. And among the spirits who communicated through him was one called André Louise. In 1944, Chico Xavier published Nosso. The book describes, in granular detail, what its author calls a spiritual colony located near the Earth, a fully organized civilization of disincarnate beings, operating in close coordination with the physical world. The colony has a government. It has a hospital system. It has schools, departments, hierarchies. It has beings who arrived from other worlds to assist in the development of Earth. Read that again. Beings. From other worlds. Published in Brazil in 1944. 3 years before the term flying saucer was first used in American newspapers. In 1958, Chico Xavier published Evolução em Dois Mundos, Evolution in Two Worlds. The book is a more technical work, co-attributed to two spirits, André Louise and Emmanuel. It describes, in extraordinary detail, the way consciousness moves between physical bodies and the subtler forms of existence between lives. It also describes the migration of spirits between Earth and other inhabited worlds, not as metaphor, as mechanism. Spirits, The book explains, do not all come from Earth. Many incarnated here after having lived, sometimes for ages, on worlds whose civilizations exceeded Earth's in moral development. They came to assist. They came, in language Grusch would not use until 2023, because they are observing us. There is one more lineage that deserves to be named here. A separate Brazilian medium named Hercílio Maes published, beginning in the 1950s, a series of books attributed to a spirit called Ramatís. The Ramatís books address the UFO phenomenon directly. Specifically, by name, A Vida no Planeta Marte e os Discos Voadores, Life on the Planet Mars and the Flying Discs, published in 1955, 8 years after the famous Roswell incident. 68 years before David Grusch sat in front of Congress. The book described multiple categories of extraterrestrial beings visiting Earth. Some benevolent, some neutral, some at lower stages of moral development than humans currently inhabit. It described their craft. It described their purposes. It described the cosmic context in which Earth exists, a developing world on the outer edge of a vast inhabited galaxy. 2 Brazilian lineages. 2 streams of Spiritist literature. Both of them documenting in writing, with publishers and dates that can be verified. What the United States government in 2023 is finally beginning to admit might be real. The parallels that shall not exist. When you place the Spiritist literature beside the disclosure documents of the last 5 years, something extraordinary happens. The descriptions do not contradict each other. The Pentagon describes objects that defy known physics. Kardec describes beings whose movement operates on principles our physics has not yet discovered. The 2021 ODNI report describes craft observed across decades of military encounters, appearing and disappearing without conventional propulsion. Ramatís, in 1955, described disc-shaped vehicles moving by what he called mental propulsion, a control mechanism not based on combustion or electromagnetic thrust. David Grusch testified to the recovery of biological remains distinct from any known terrestrial species. Chico Xavier transcribed, in 1944, descriptions of beings who once inhabited physical bodies on worlds other than Earth, bodies adapted to atmospheres, gravity, and biological conditions unlike our own. NASA's 2023 panel concluded that the phenomenon warrants serious institutional study, that it cannot be dismissed as misperception or fraud. Kardec in 1868 documented that the more developed the inhabitants of a world become, the more they take an interest in less developed worlds. Not to colonize, not to dominate, but to observe. And, where appropriate, to assist. This is not coincidence. This is convergence. And in science, convergence from independent sources is how the truth is approached. Why this framework matters now. The world is currently in the middle of one of the most important informational transitions in modern history. The institutions that spent 70 years denying the phenomenon are now reluctantly admitting that something is here, but they have no framework to explain it. The dominant scientific worldview is materialist. It assumes consciousness is a byproduct of biology. It assumes intelligent life elsewhere would resemble us in form, in motivation, in technology. And inside that framework, the disclosure data does not fit. It cannot fit. Because materialist science has no language for beings whose existence does not require dense matter. It has no language for craft that move through dimensions our instruments are not yet calibrated to detect. It has no language for visitors whose purpose is not conquest and not commerce, but observation, education, and slow assistance across generations. Spiritism does. It has had that language since 1857. This is what makes Kardec and Chico Xavier so important at exactly this moment in history. Not because they are religious. Most of what they wrote is closer to philosophy and proto-anthropology than to anything that resembles conventional faith. Their value is that they offer, already worked out in great detail, the framework that mainstream institutions are now scrambling to construct from scratch. The disclosure era will not last forever. At some point, the question will move from, is there something here, to what is it? And why is it here? And when that moment arrives, the civilizations, the hierarchies, the purposes, the categories of beings will need a vocabulary. A coherent system. A framework that was built not in 2025, not in 2023, not by an intelligence officer or an astrophysicist, but quietly, patiently, by a French educator in a candlelit study in 1868. And by a Brazilian medium in a small house in Minas Gerais across the entire 20th century. When David Grusch finished his testimony in 2023, the chair of the subcommittee thanked him and adjourned the hearing. The footage was clipped. The headlines ran for 2 days. The institutional silence resumed. But somewhere in Brazil, in Spiritist study centers that have been quietly meeting every week for more than a century, people put down the news, opened books that were published 70 and 90 and 150 years ago, and recognized, without surprise, what the most powerful nation on earth was just beginning to acknowledge. The framework was already built. The descriptions were already written. The civilizations were already mapped. All that remained was for the rest of the world to catch up. And very slowly, it is. If this episode unsettled you, if it opened a door you did not expect, leave one word in the comments. Just one word. That is enough. Subscribe. Because 8 more episodes are coming. And we have only just begun to look up. In the next episode of this series, we go inside the most detailed account of an extraterrestrial civilization ever written. A book published in Brazil in 1944. It describes a society, not on this earth, with cities, with institutions, with millions of inhabitants. All of them once human. Now living in a place no telescope has ever found, and no spacecraft has ever reached. Next episode, Nosso, the colony in the sky.